Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today we are continuing our Reformation series according to Belloc. Last time, I discussed the Reformation in general terms, according to Belloc, and now we're getting into important people within the Reformation, starting with Henry VIII. First, according to Belloc, you need to know the state of England, which was a traditional agricultural country with a sizable amount of trade, with the big cities having many foreigners because of this trade business, which experienced most of the support for the Reformation, which would cause later revolution or rebellions in the countryside over Henry VIII's decisions to break with Rome. The king was more or less all powerful, except for the church, which was independent and theoretically able to control its own matters, while the king controlled the rest of the country. It was governed by short parliaments that would meet for a few weeks at a time and provide the king with the taxes that he needed to complete the wars that he would get involved in. The country had been ravaged by the civil wars of the Plantagenets, known as the War of the Roses. And Henry VIII was born as the second son, and his brother was the sickly Prince Arthur. Now, he was sickly only at the end, and he died immediately after being nominally married to Catherine of Aragon. And this is important because they never consummated the marriage because he was too sick to do so. So there was a dispensation from the Pope in order for Henry VIII to marry the wife of his brother or the widow of his brother, I should say, though the marriage was nominal, so it really wasn't an official marriage, according to Belloc. Now, Henry VII died, and that's actually when Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon. Henry VII didn't make Henry VIII marry Catherine of Aragon. It was actually his choice. And Belloc characterizes Henry VIII as unable to withstand impulse, passionate, and weak-willed, dominated first by Wolsey, then by Anne Boleyn, then by Thomas Cromwell, and then his brother-in-law Seymour. Catherine of Aragon, on the other hand, opposed to Anne Boleyn and these other people who dominated him, treated him with affection and respect when advising him. And every single time Henry VIII revolted against each manager in explosions of anger and passion. And his sort of submission to these different managers happened in basically fits of rage, more or less. At one moment he was under their control, and then one moment he was not. He was a bad judge of men. He picked really bad advisors. He was intellectual and well-trained in theology, and he was indecisive in foreign affairs. At the heart, he was emotional and a sensitive musician. He even composed two masses, the music for two masses. He had extreme vanity, which led him to fall for Anne Boleyn, but this vanity did not prevent him from breaking with Anne Boleyn. He even had a strong attachment to religious traditions, which might seem to be a contradiction because he is the one that breaks with Rome. Now, he broke with Rome because of, his extreme anger, his fits of rage, his desire to get his way, but he was extremely weak-willed because he wasn't able to control himself. Now, some people might say that's strong-willed, but Belloc characterizes him otherwise as not being strong-willed actually because of that. Now, Anne Boleyn, we'll get into her eventually, but Belloc is actually much more, I believe, easy on her or more favorable to her than she's portrayed in most things. And Henry VIII is, he's got this strong attachment to religious traditions. He never changed much of of any of the religious traditions of England. That all took place under his son Edward because of the influence of Thomas Cranmer and the Seymours and all these different people. But he's always known for Henry VIII and his 6 wives. Which, interesting enough, this is me saying this, not necessarily Belloc. I would say he more or less only had, let's see, Catherine of Aragon was his legitimate wife. Anne Boleyn was not because he was still married to Catherine of Aragon. Jane Seymour he was married to, but she died after giving birth to a child, Edward. So that's 2. Anna Cleves wasn't really a marriage; it was annulled very quickly. Catherine Howard. So basically 4. He had 4 wives, not 6. And of course, all of these, whenever he broke with somebody, whenever he broke away from one of his managers, it led to one of their deaths, or because it was an extremely dangerous time in court, and because monarchies are very personal forms of government, a lot of the punishment is also personal. So you personally wrong the king, you might receive his personal wrath, or you'll receive his personal mercy. And let's just say his fits of rage, and especially at the moments of his breaking with these managers, led to a lot of the deaths of his former managers. Anne Boleyn was executed. Wolsey was sent away and then died later. Cromwell was executed as well. Basically, if you pushed him far enough, he would rebel. But Cromwell achieved the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, which empowered a class of people in England that would forever be for the revolution, for the Protestant revolt, and even come to destroy the power of the monarchy itself in the form of the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution. Basically, Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell, but mostly Thomas Cromwell, set up the downfall of the monarchy, which is perfectly, perfectly shown in the character of Oliver Cromwell, who is Thomas Cromwell's, I believe, like nephew or great nephew of some sort. He's a relative of him, and because Cromwell had made, had achieved all these things through the dissolution of the monasteries and the reorganization of money, basically they redistributed a lot of money in the land that was within the monasteries to the merchant class and the nobility, that the kingdom would now be heavily in an oligarchical structure, and the Tudors would more or less go through the remaining power of the monarch, which we'll get to see. We'll talk about each Tudor, I believe each Tudor monarch as we go in this series. But it's really kind of amazing that Henry VIII is the downfall of the monarch. But yeah, so he changed Henry VIII broke with Rome over his desire to get an annulment or a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, but he never really broke theologically. He was the one who wrote defenses of the papacy against Martin Luther as well. So you can see this sort of as a very confusing strategy. Of course, Henry VIII doesn't have a strategy. He is very much geared towards his lusts and passions, and whatever's dominating him and whoever is dominating him at the time has the power to guide him in the direction. I mean, his foreign policy is a perfect example of his indecisiveness, his inability to accomplish anything. Wolsey ran his foreign policy at the beginning, and then he flip flops between France and Spain, and even Protestants. Like, he supports various different groups periodically, depending on his mood or depending on who he favors at the time. So this really isn't somebody who has a strong grasp on where he wants the kingdom to go. He basically is personifying how he views the kingdom as basically at his whims. This is what makes him very much a tyrant. You know, he changes in drastic ways out of almost nowhere. It would seem to somebody on the outside. Of course, on the inside, you can see that he's either frustrated with whoever's managing him, or he's becoming managed by somebody else. Henry VIII is just a perfect example of a king who rules for selfish means. He uses theological reasoning for why he does some of the things he does, with sort of breaking from Rome and getting rid of Catherine of Aragon. Um, he basically says that in the Bible it says he wouldn't have any heirs, so therefore this is to show that this marriage is immoral. But he also has a daughter, he just doesn't have a son, and he basically does everything he can to accomplish a son, which is all his fault from a genetics perspective, but he doesn't know that. Of course, it's far before genetics. But even within the sort of the surrounding him, the court surrounding him, the many of the people did not think the break from Rome was going to be permanent. They thought that, okay, we've seen this before. Kings have had basically fights with the popes in the past. This isn't going to last very long. The king isn't necessarily theologically with Martin Luther, which was all true. This is just a spat, and it really is the aftermath of Henry VIII's life that leads England to become Protestant. But at the heart of it really is the dissolution of the monasteries. If the dissolution of the monasteries hadn't have happened, the leadership the controlling leadership of England would be much of the same, would have been the old guard, and the old guard were more or less these groups or these people such as the Duke of Norfolk, uh, who represented the old nobility, who were conservative, I guess you could say, or in theology, and were more or less just going along to get along with Henry VIII in order to protect their own skin and secure power for their noble houses. And is shown by how, the his later reign, Henry VIII's later reign, sort of turns on a dime more or less for the Duke of Norfolk, as the drama with his um with Catherine Howard, Henry VIII, one of Henry VIII's wives, one of Henry VIII's wives, comes crashing down and basically sinks the Duke of Norfolk's ship. And Henry VIII even leaves many people in charge of ruling the kingdom for his young son Edward, but it eventually the power gets seized by Seymour, his the king's brother-in-law, who more or less now becomes sort of a dictator and dictates that Edward and the country will become a Protestant country. But of course, as I said, this is all open to them because the nobility, the old nobility, has been weakened, and the rise of the merchant class and rise of sort of new houses that weren't necessarily powerful prior to the dissolution of the monasteries. Basically, Henry VIII's friends get a lot of the money that comes from the dissolution of the monasteries, and I believe some of the conservative families do participate in this as well. But it raises a large number of powerful people that are now attached to the Protestant revolt, and Catholicism to them means giving up the wealth that they just seized, and they have no intention of going back on that. So that's been mostly my commentary. The last sort of, if you look at the last 7 or 10 minutes or whatever, has been my commentary. But more or less, Henry VIII in some ways is a despicable man, but also he just seems weak and kind of pathetic. And you can kind of feel bad for him in some ways, and uh, be frustrated with him in other ways. But it's important to understand why we have gotten to the point we are at right now. And for all Americans watching, this is our history too. We are coming from the English school of thought. We're more or less America's descendant is an Anglo country, and we should know why we are where we are. So, thank you everyone for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And God bless everyone. Bye.